Hi, this is Mr. Dubchuk, and this is lesson 1.5, which is a very brief overview on CSS and how you can work with CSS. So, what I've done here is I've made a really basic HTML website. You can see here there's no colors, there's no styles, there's no really anything to it, just a bunch of text. CSS allows you to style things. So let me just get started here, and you'll see a very basic introduction so that you kind of know what's going on before you start the next lesson. All right, I'm in brackets. I have my website set up here. So with CSS, you have three things. Let me type them out here. I'm going to do H1, all right. Here's the three parts of a line of CSS. You have a selector, a property, and a value. Again, that's selector, property, value. I know this seems cheesy, but say it out loud with me. Selector, property, value. And let's look at how it's lined up here. We have the selector on one line with this here is called a curly bracket. And then we have the property, colon, value, semicolon, curly bracket. As you start doing more CSS, you put one property and value per line. So I might have font size 18, font family, Arial, align, anyway, bunch of different things. But anyway, I'm going to start with this. Now, what the selector does is once I have my HTML file linked to this CSS file, then I can select an HTML element to style. All right, so I have my H1. That means all of my H1s are going to wind up being this color green. So let me save this real quick. I have one H1, that is this right here. So now if I come to my website and I refresh it, you'll see my H1 will switch to being green. See that? I can change the font family. I'm going to do that real quick. Font family Arial, and I'll give it a backup of sans serif. Okay, let's check that out. F5. Okay. Now here's the thing. What this does is it will style every single H1 on my page with these properties. So if I come down here and I add more H1s, I'm just going to add a couple more. H1, heading, H1, version 2, add in 2 more. 3. Okay, let me save this, refresh. You'll see all of my H1s are styled with this style, because in my style sheet, when I select an H1, that means every H1 on my page. Let's say I don't want to do that. I only want to do a specific H1. That would mean I'm going to come to the H1 on my HTML, and I'm going to give it an ID. ID equals first H1. Okay. So now, if I come to my CSS, instead of calling an H1, an ID, I use a hashtag. Hashtag first underscore H1. I have to make sure it's typed exactly the same way it is there. Okay. And now if I refresh, I should see There we go. Just this H1 now has those properties. All right. If you give a tag an ID, that means you're only going to use this selector once. If you're going to do something multiple times, you're going to give it a class. So a class, I'm going to call this class equals, I'm going to call it H1, 2. And I'm going to give this same class to all 3 of these H1s. Okay, to call up a class in here, my class selector is a period. Period H1, 2. Color red, font family. I'm going to do same font family. Arial and serif. Font weight, however, is going to be, do I have more options than this? Aha, bolder. All right, let's try that. Need to come into here, save this too. Check that out. So now I've got all 4 of these are H1s, but because I used IDs and classes, I was able to style them differently. Let's see here. I got a bunch of paragraphs. These 2 are paragraphs, and these are all H2s. I'm going to take my H2s. I'm going to make my H2s all my H2s. I did that wrong. There we go. Color blue, font family, Arial, sans serif. Boom. Cool. And I want my paragraphs also to be sans serif. So P. Actually, here's what I'm going to do here. I have. No, I'm not going to do that. Anyway, let me do all my paragraphs. P. Font family, Arial, sans serif. Okay. How about that? So anyway, that's a very basic overview of CSS. You have a selector, property, and a value. Your selector selects an HTML item, and then you can assign different properties and values to that HTML item in order to give it different styles. So now that you've watched this video, now you can go on to video 2, and you'll get a basic introduction of how to build your first website using HTML and CSS together. Oh, one more thing before I close. Website I'll have you bookmark is this W3 Schools. This gives you a list of every single CSS property that you can use. For example, let me find one real quick. I want to find, I'm making this up as I go here, so I apologize. I'm going to do border. Here we go. I like border. Border. So if I click on this, this gives me examples of how to use the border property. So if I look at this, H1, I could give it a border of 5 pixels solid red. Let's come and look at this. You see, I've got my H1 border, 5 pixels solid red, and that's this one. Let's try that on mine. I want to give this div. I've given this div an ID of main, so I'm going to use that ID, main, and I'm going to make the entire div with a border 5 pix solid. I like blue though, blue. And let's see what happens to my div. So anyway, you can look up things on the CSS website And you're about to get a bunch more tricks in the next lesson on how to do this.